All right, guys, welcome to Chapter 1. We're talking about the foundations of penetration testing. Now, this course was designed to prepare you for the CompTIA Pentest Plus, the PT0003 certification. So, my name's John Haskell, and we're going to start building the mental framework you need to start thinking like an ethical hacker. Now, remember, these videos are not meant to supplement 100% of your outside learning. I do highly recommend that you read the chapter before you listen to these lectures. And then that way, if you do that, when you actually show up to class, you'll have a greater understanding from when we do our technical labs. All right. So today we're going to be covering some of the core concepts of the trade. We're going to define the role of an ethical hacker and the teams that we work with. One of the most important concepts for the exam is understanding the difference between a simple vulnerability scan and a full penetration test. And then we'll also look at different types of tests, engagement models, and the standard lifecycle or methodology that we will follow for every assessment itself. Now, for the exam, pay close attention to these objectives. You need to know how to plan and scope an assessment legally. We aren't just breaking things, we are performing analysis and critically producing a written report with remediation techniques. Now, the goal. Remember, the final product isn't the hack itself, it's going to be the report. So, what is a penetration tester? We are security experts hired to simulate cyber attacks. Our job is to find the weaknesses before the bad guys do. Now, memorize this. We operate only with explicit written authorization. Without that piece of paper, you are committing a crime. Intent does not matter in the eyes of the law. Permission does. So make sure that you have permission before you start being a pen tester. Now, there are a couple of different definitions here. First one's going to be red team. This is the offensive team. They simulate the adversary and focus purely on breaking in and gaining access. They're the ones who are pretending to be the hacker. We've got the blue team. This is the defensive team, usually the Internal Security Operations Center, and their job is to help detect. And then lastly, we've got the purple team. This is a collaborative approach. The red and blue teams work together in real time. The red team attacks, then the blue team asks, "Did you see that?" This is something to help us improve detection capabilities much faster. Now think of vulnerability scanning like building a building inspector with a checklist. They walk around looking for code violations. They don't try to kick down the door. It's automated and broad. We use tools to check against database signatures. We call this inch deep, mile wide, because we check everything, but only really superficially. In contrast, penetration testing is like a specialized team trying to crack the vault. We are actually simulating the robbery itself. This relies on human expertise and creativity to manually exploit the flaws. This is inch wide, mile deep. We pick specific entry points and dig as deep as we can to prove the business impact, like data theft. Now, for the exam, you must be able to distinguish these two. Scanning checks what flaws exist, while penetration testing answers, can it be hacked? Okay. Now, scans are cheaper and run more frequently, normally weekly, while pen tests are expensive, manual, and usually done annually or quarterly. It all depends on the organization. Now, there are some scanning risks. Scanners aren't perfect. A false positive is when the scanner cries wolf, reporting that the vulnerability isn't really there. This wastes all of our time. Now, the false negative, on the other hand, is much more dangerous. This is when the scanner says everything is fine, but the vulnerability actually exists. This gives the client a false sense of security, allowing the hackers to take hold. So, who are we simulating here for a test? Well, threat actors. We need to know who the enemy is to simulate them effectively. For instance, script kiddies are unskilled attackers using tools they really don't understand. Insider threats, current or former employees. These are high risk because they already have access into the network. Or maybe even if it is APT, Advanced Persistent Threats, nation state actors. These are highly skilled, well funded, and very, very patient. When we set up a test, we define how much information we start with. And there's 3 models. There's the black box, the white box, and the gray box. Zero knowledge, full knowledge, and partial knowledge. So let's talk about the black box first. In a black box test, we have 0 prior knowledge. We act like a real world external attacker. We might get a company name or a URL. This is very time consuming and very expensive because we have to spend a lot of time on reconnaissance. You've got the white box. This is like the developer. White box is quite the opposite. We have all the knowledge. We've got the source code, the IP maps, credentials. This is a thorough audit meant to find bugs deep in the logic. Now, the drawback here is it lacks realism. Real attackers rarely are going to have all the blueprints of the building. And then lastly, we've got the gray box. This is kind of like the insider. Gray box is the middle ground. We may have partial knowledge, like user credentials or network diagrams, and this is going to help us simulate things like insider threats or even a compromised employee. It offers the best balance of efficiency and realism. This is what you see a lot. Now for target scopes, internal versus external, external assessment tests the perimeter of the defenses. So we've set up the firewalls, the VPNs, and the web servers, but we only test them from outside in the internet. Versus an internal assessment, we assume the attacker is already on the inside. We test from the perspective of someone plugged into a wall jack or on the internal Wi-Fi. Now, there are some other special assessments that we can do, such as physical. Sometimes we want to test physical controls. Can we pick the lock? Can we tailgate past a guard? Can we clone a badge? Can we get inside the building? And this is where a lot of time the social engineering tests happen as well, where they might be like, well, amateurs hack systems, professionals hack people. This includes phishing emails, vishing, quishing, all the social engineering attacks that we can think of. Okay. Now, there is a life cycle that CompTIA likes to test you on. CompTIA defines it as a 5-step life cycle, and you need to know the order. Plan, recon, scan, exploit, reporting. Now, post-exploit is often grouped with exploit or reporting, depending on the model. But here we're going to treat it as a distinct phase, just so you know that it does exist. So the first phase here is going to be, well, planning and scoping. It's the blueprint. We do not touch a keyboard until this phase is done. We need to define the business objective, the strict scope, what IPs are allowed, what are we not allowed to touch, what is the timeline, who are the emergency contacts. And we may need to have some of the documents put in place before we start. And so please know these 3 at least for the exam. The first one's going to be the NDA, non-disclosure agreement. It protects the secrets that we find. Second one's going to be the MSA, Master Service Agreement. This is like our terms and payments. This is like the overall kind of like generic contract. And then the most specific one is going to be our statement of work. It's going to define the rules for the specific tests. And we like to call this the rules of engagement. That's where you're going to see the statement of work called all the time. Phase 2 is all going to be about passive reconnaissance. Passive recon means gathering info without interacting with the target system. The stealth is high. The target does not need to know that we're looking because we're just using public resources like Google Dorking, LinkedIn, Whois, and social media. We're just going to be poking around, but only from the internet directly. They don't know that we're doing this. Now, the next phase, which is phase 2.5, let's call it 2.5, is the active recon phase. Now, once we've done with our passive, we'll go with our active recon. We're going to interact directly with the system. This is going to generate logs and traffic. Okay? This is when we use tools like Nmap for port scanning and banner grabbing. Now, the risk here is stealth is low because we're likely going to trigger an IPS or an IDS. And so we got to be careful here with our active reconnaissance. The next section will be vulnerability discovery. And so we're going to use the map from our recon to find weak spots. And we're going to use tools like Nessus to do this. This is like automated vulnerability scanning. Now, critically, our value isn't running the tool itself, but interpreting the results. Because remember, we're going to have false positives here. There's going to say it's vulnerable to something, but is it truly? And if it isn't, how do we know it is and what isn't actually vulnerable? Now, once we know what is vulnerable, we're going to exploit it. We're going to break in. This is where we're going to actively attempt to bypass security controls. We're going to perform SQL injection, cracking passwords, gaining that initial foothold. And there's a whole bunch of different ways of doing it, but we're going to find out what the weaknesses are with our previous stages. Now, once you're in, now what? This is the phase that distinguishes a pen test from a scan. We want to prove business impact. We look for escalation of privileges, lateral movement, and persistence. Now, with that said, attackers rarely land on a critical server first. They're going to land on the receptionist work desk. Now, they're going to pivot themselves into a compromised system as a bridge into a deeper part of the network. So they're going to wear a ton of different hats here. They may have been the receptionist workstation at the beginning, but maybe they want to be Frank from accounting, or they want to see if they can be elevate themselves into an IT account itself. Because once they do, their next step is just to maintain persistence. Now, persistence is going to ensure that they can get back in if the user reboots or changes their password. Now, this might be creating a new admin account or a new scheduled task, but they got to be very, very careful with this with production because they don't want to leave a permanent backdoor in for the real hackers. Because remember, we are just pretending to be the hacker. We have a contract. We need to make sure that this is highly documented so that way we can remove it when we're done. Because when we're done, we get to the cleanup phase. As a professional, we're always going to restore the environment. We must remove our artifacts, delete our test accounts, revert any changes we've made. Find it the way we found it. Give it back the way we found it. There we go. And then when we're all said and done, this is the most important part. It's going to be the final deliverable. We're going to switch from adversary to trusted advisor. This is where the executive summary is written, technical details for the engineers, and we'll use things like the CVSS scores to rate severity and tell them, well, how do we remediate this when we're all said and done? And that brings me back to, guess what? Ethics. Permission and intent are the only things separating a professional from a criminal. Always stay within scope. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself with a new orange jumpsuit behind bars. And then the other thing is they're going to ask you a little bit about the laws. We need to know the regulations and where they would pertain to. For instance, knowing that PCI DSS is credit card data security, HIPAA is medical info, medical records, GDPR is EU data privacy, and certain things like with GDPR, knowing that they do have the right to be forgotten. So you, as an EU citizen, can reach out to a company and say, if you have any information about me, please delete it. Or we can even talk about the CFAA, which is not one that you see a lot on, but you will see it for the Pentest, because this is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It's a US one, and it's literally the 1980s anti-hacking law. So we have to make sure that we stay okay here. Otherwise, again, we don't want to be a criminal. All right. Well, that covers the foundations for Chapter 1. If there's any questions, please let me know. But make sure that you're going through this material thoroughly. I've given you a lot of different resources throughout this book, and it all works together. It's not going to do you any good to do part of it. You need to do it all, okay? So go through this. This is just Chapter 1. We'll go through Chapter 16 by the end of this class, and I'll see you for Chapter 2. If